Welcome to Idea to Investment, the podcast where we dig into the exciting world of entrepreneurship and investment. We tell the stories of the tech creators doing innovative work and the investors who back them up. Along the way, unveiling the fascinating journey from the birth of an idea to scoring crucial investment. We highlight the voices of entrepreneurs, showcasing their grit and creativity, all while gaining insights from the investors who believed in those dreams. Get ready to be inspired, stay informed, and stay tuned as we explore the awesome collision of ideas and investments. Idea to Investment is a production of Tech Alliance of Southwestern Ontario and is sponsored by TD Ferrera Wealth Advisory Group.
My name is Erin Bury, and I am the co-founder and CEO at Willful.
Well, welcome to the podcast. We're very happy that you could join us. And we always want to start with the pitch. So I want you to imagine that I am a potential investor, and you need to sell me on investing with Willful in 60 seconds. Go for it.
Okay. It was a few years ago when my husband's uncle passed away unexpectedly, and he had a will, but he had never discussed anything outside of that when it came to end-of-life plans. So Kevin's aunt rather, his wife of 40 years, and Kevin's other family members were sitting around really struggling with how to honor his wishes, what he would have wanted. And it highlighted that having a plan is so important to ensure your wishes are followed and to ensure the burden is reduced on your family. When Kevin and I went to get our own plans in place, we saw it's expensive, time consuming, and not all that convenient to get a will and other estate plans. And so we built Willful to be the easiest, most affordable, most convenient way to create a will, power of attorney documents, and other end-of-life plans so that you can get peace of mind for you and your family for less than $100 in less than 20 minutes. And since launching in 2017, we've become Canada's top online will provider, partnered with 2 of the 5 big banks, as well as companies like Amazon, and we're just getting started.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So already I have a ton of questions. And the first one I think is about the market. So when you started to realize that this was going to be a potential business, what did the market look like? Like, was there already a digital aspect to the market, or were you innovating in that genre?
It's a great question. So there were a couple players in the space when we looked around to get our own will done. But at the time, the main online player didn't speak to us in terms of its design and user experience. It felt like the will company that our parents might use instead of something like Wealthsimple, which was really new at the time and was absolutely beautiful and put a huge focus on the feel, the user experience of it. So that's where we thought there could be a big improvement, is just in designing something for digital natives who appreciate, user experience and design, and also covering off some different aspects that we didn't see in that existing provider. So, our biggest challenge is educating people about wills in general and about the fact that you can do a will online. So we're happy to say that peer is still there. They're doing well. There's really only a few players in this space in Canada. And I think all of us have room to grow because frankly, there are so many people, unfortunately, who don't have and need a will.
Is it because there is that misconception that this is not something that I can just do on the internet that still exists? Like people thinking this is not legal for me to do it this way?
I think there's a few barriers. The first one is obviously that there's a lot of misconceptions and ignorance about the process. And that's just because we don't talk about death at the dinner table growing up. We don't learn about estate planning or wills in school. And so often I meet people who have very natural misconceptions like, well, I don't need a will until I'm old, or I don't need a will unless I'm really wealthy, or, I have to visit a lawyer to create my will. And so a lot of what we do is try to dispel these myths that, a will is a document that every adult should have, that even if you put it in place before you have sizable assets, it's going to stay in effect and be there when your family needs it, instead of passing away without a will and letting the government decide who gets your assets, causing family arguments, making it more expensive for the people that you leave behind and more stressful. So Again, I think the first reason is just probably reticence to think about our own mortality. That certainly plays a role in it. And then there are the practical barriers of cost and time. You know, we often see folks who are maybe going on a trip next week and they need to get it done now. And, you know, if you've ever worked with a lawyer's office, it's not usually, you know, going back and forth with them in a matter of days. It can take weeks. It can take months, in-person appointments, taking time off work or packing your baby in the car. So I think those practical barriers of cost and convenience are definitely addressed with Willful, but most of what we face every day is just how do we get around human nature, which is I can put this off for tomorrow. I'm not planning to die tomorrow, and I don't want to think about this because death is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you know, for anybody who has gone through the process after a loved one has passed away, you know, it's just such it's one of the most stressful things that you will experience as a human being trying to navigate all of this. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the feel that the website has, that the interface has. Um, how how do you impart that feel, and you know, what does that mean to the user?
I think it started with identifying the values that we had for Willful. Obviously, with the subject matter we're dealing with, we could motivate with fear. We could say, you know, you might die tomorrow. Do you have a will? We could really use that fear and play into that side of it. But from day one, we've been so focused on empathy and empowerment, right? Really, this idea of we are ultimately not selling legal documents, we're selling peace of mind. We're selling this gift that you're giving to your loved ones, right? It's very similar to life insurance. Life insurance is something that you pay for, you can pay for a long time, and it never benefits you, right? It only by definition benefits your family. You do it because you care about your family so much and you want them to be taken care of. So that's really the feel that we have on Willful, which is give your family the gift of peace of mind, document your wishes, make sure you're in the driver's seat. And we really focus on empowerment, right? Most of us don't know a lot about estate planning coming into it, and that can make it feel like this impossible task on the to-do list. So our approach is really that TurboTax style of let's guide you every step of the way. Let's, you know, get an understanding of your family situation. Do you have minor children that you might need to appoint guardians for, or do you only have pets? You know, are you married or not? Like these questions can really help us to tailor the experience, and then at providing education as you go through it. You know, who should be a beneficiary? What is an executor, and who might I want to appoint? These are really important questions. And so it's not just about the form field process, it's the support along the way. Even if it is a digital process, really making it feel like you're supported along the way.
So, in my experience, one of the most difficult things to deal with is dealing with the banks. So, I think it's really interesting that you have actually partnered with a couple of the big banks. How important and at what stage in the development of Willful did you recognize that it was going to be important to partner with at least one or two banks?
Yeah, it was really never in our wildest dreams did we expect that we would be partnered with two of the five big banks, with CIBC and Scotiabank. I think from day one, it became pretty obvious that this was a gap for financial institutions, for insurance companies, for employer benefits companies. And we started receiving inbound inquiries from these folks who were saying our customers need estate plans, right? If you think about the people who are creating wills or updating wills, it's typically centered around life moments, right? Life milestones. Having a child is number one. Buying a home or other large asset is number two, and the death of a loved one is the third most popular reason to kind of be thinking about this stuff. And those are a lot of the same reasons that you might be opening a bank account or taking out an insurance policy or opening an RESP. And so I think there's a recognition that this is already top of mind for a lot of these customers. And the banks don't have their own offering. They typically have a trust division that might handle much more complex estates, which is great because that's not something that we cater to at Willful. And so I think it really complements their existing resources on the estate planning side and fills a gap in their kind of ecosystem of financial and wealth planning. And we're also in the middle of the largest generational wealth transfer in history. So I think there's a recognition that a lot of money is going to be changing hands in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And the easier the banks and any company can make that process on the family members who are acting as executors or who are receiving money as beneficiaries, the better off everyone will be.
Yeah, it occurs to me that it's kind of weird that the banks haven't, or that, society in general hasn't realized that estate planning is financial planning. It might be the last chapter of your financial plan, but really it just makes sense that it would all be rolled into one, wouldn't it?
Well, it is interesting because it's really seen as this separate thing. I was just listening to The Psychology of Money, the book, and it's all about building wealth and human nature when it comes to money. But one thing we just never talk about is that we spend our entire lives trying to build wealth and to be able to, pass on something meaningful to the next generation. But we never talk about the how. Like, what's the most efficient way to do that? How do we minimize taxes? What are the most efficient ways to structure assets so they flow through the will or stay outside of it? For example, naming a beneficiary directly on a life insurance policy or a registered account. So again, that goes back to the mission at Willful, which is, yes, of course, we have a goal of becoming the largest online estate planning company in Canada. But ultimately, our mission is education, because the more people are educated about why it's a complete no-brainer to have an estate plan, and the more well-positioned we are to be the place that you create that plan.
So it seems to me, Erin, that you're operating in kind of this confluence of a lot of really challenging places. The legal tech space, the estate planning space, all of these areas that come with some pretty significant regulatory challenges. So I guess what were some of the biggest challenges, regulatory speaking?
Yeah, we don't need regulatory approval to operate, right? We're not offering legal advice to our customers. And so it's not that we need a check of an approval from provincial law societies, but there is this big challenge in the estate planning space, in the legal space. It's quite old school, right? It's quite antiquated. You still have to sign a will on paper in 9 out of 10 provinces, even despite COVID really advancing legislation. So we've really tried to lean in to build bridges with the legal community to say, listen, whether you're open to it or not, technology is changing the way not only that legal documents are created and executed, but the consumer behavior around how they want to, take care of tasks on their legal to-do list. And so we were the first online will provider to get a license from the Law Society of Ontario through their innovation program. And we're part of similar programs in provinces like BC. And so it's been great to kind of work with them and say, what's possible today under the regulatory framework so we can help more people execute their wills digitally, or how can we move this legislation forward so that, you can buy a house online, but yet you still have to have a printer and a pen and in-person witnesses to execute a will. That's just a huge barrier. And the goal of all of these regulators is the same as our goal, which is improving access to justice, removing barriers, and moving the needle on the number of people that have these legal documents.
So can you see that changing? Do you foresee more provinces going with a fully digital landscape with estate planning then?
I do. I'm optimistic. I think in the US, we've seen a lot faster progress. There are quite a few states there that do allow e-wills or digital signatures on wills, or this ability to store a will online. Right now in Canada, BC is the only province that has allowed that, but you've seen some steps forward in other provinces where you can virtually witness a will over Zoom. So, do I think it'll take time? Yes, but I'm confident we'll get there. And the number one reason I believe that is because regulators can drag their heels all they want. The profession can drag their heels all they want. Ultimately, consumers will be the ones to decide, right? If there's enough pressure in any industry from the people who are putting their hands up and saying this doesn't make sense, I do believe change will happen. So, I wish we had an unlimited government lobbying budget to be knocking on the doors at Queen's Park to get this changed. But in the absence of that, we just try to do a lot of storytelling about why we believe that digital processes can make it easier, faster, safer to not only create a will online, but to execute it digitally, store it online, and most importantly, provide access to that document for the family members when they need it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up budget constraints because obviously we do talk a lot about financing and funding. And at what point in your journey did you know, okay, what we want to do is going to require more funding? And how did you go about seeking that funding?
Well, that would be day zero. We
Right from the gate.
realized that we would need more money than we had. We always say that Willful is built by consumers for consumers. My husband and I started the company. He worked at a cement plant. He worked in trades. I had spent time as a tech journalist and running my own tech marketing agency. And so we knew that we needed to have money from day one to hire developers to build it and to hire estate lawyers who would obviously be crucial to drafting the legal documents themselves. And now we have amazing partners, estate lawyer partners in each province. And sadly, we did not have six-figure bank accounts of our own that could self-fund it. So, over the last almost 8 years, we've raised every type of funding you can imagine, from government funding through training grants, SHRED, IRAP, and all the innovation programs, to friends and family funding. And I don't have any rich aunts, so that's like $5,000 checks from family members and friends, whatever we could scrape together. We've raised institutional funding from VC firms. We've pitched angel groups and have angel investors from companies like Shopify. And I'm sure if you named another type of funding, I'd be like, oh yeah, we have that too. So, I think part of the intentional path of being a funded company versus a bootstrap company was also just the journey, right? I had run a professional services firm prior to that, which, typically you're not raising money to run an agency. You're just, making sure that you have good profit margins. Whereas with tech, I knew, especially in our industry, it's really common to kind of outspend the growth, especially just to get it off the ground. And that would be a huge learning opportunity for me. So it was, I learned a lot, but now I'm very happy to say we are profitable. And so now we really are in charge of our own destiny. We're not reliant on going out to market, which, as we've seen in the last couple of years, is really powerful, right? I think a lot of companies, unfortunately, were faced with situations where they had to raise money and couldn't, and we never want to be put in that situation. So profitability has become a core focus for us, but we're happy to have a team of investors on board who supported us in the early days and now support the vision that we have for the future.
Yeah, it seems like you're certainly in an enviable position now. But when you go back to, those earlier days, did you have, like, was there a strategy? Like, I don't want to say it sounds like you were indiscriminate with your fundraising, but you probably didn't say no to a lot of investors.
Well, I think there was, luckily I was on the founding team at BetaKit. So I spent a couple of years interviewing and writing about every single fundraise in Canada and learning about all of the amazing programs that were out there and all of the regional innovation centers, obviously, like Tech Alliance. And so I think I had a hierarchy, right? I knew that the best type of money is free money. And so how could we look at grants? I had already used at my last company a lot of training grants to empower and train our team. And so, you make a list. You're like, okay, what's the best money? Free money. Are there any grants? Are there any programs we can take advantage of? And then you also just I read an amazing book by Brad Feld. I think it was called Founder Deals. Either way, it's a great book, a fundraising Bible, essentially, by Brad Feld. And it was great because it really broke down for me in detail the various types of fundraising, the various types of investors, and when and why to seek each type. So obviously day one is not the time pre-revenue for me to be going and pitching an institutional VC. So in the early days, we knew really the only people that are going to give us money before we've made a dollar of revenue are our friends and family. So let's spend the time at Christmas dinner trying to convince them versus wasting our breath going to angel groups or VCs. And then as we kind of grew and we got more traction, we were able to almost graduate. We went from friends and family to individual angels that we were personally connected with, who were really investing in us, right? There was not a lot of traction. They were taking a big bet, but they believed in us. And then from there, we were able to graduate to more formal angel groups and institutional investors once we had a real business, right? I did forget one funding source, which is we went through the Founder Fuel Startup Accelerator program in 2019 in Montreal, which was started by Real Ventures, the VC firm. And so that was incredibly amazing because it wasn't just money. It was guidance and expertise and a pitch day in front of 1,000 people that got us a ton of exposure. So we've been really fortunate to not just take checks, but also for those checks to have a lot of strategic guidance and help, which we definitely needed in the early days and even still today.
Yeah, having an investor who can provide more than just capital, some guidance, I think is probably key for you. There's also, I think there's one other funding source that we also need to talk about, and that is Dragon's Den.
Yes.
Tell me about that experience. Like, how did that come to be, and what was the experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. Again, as someone who spent so many years profiling amazing entrepreneurs as a tech journalist, I'm just so in love with hearing about people's ideas and how they brought them to life. And so I always knew that it was something I wanted to apply for, especially because we're a direct-to-consumer company. Our number one challenge as a business is distribution. How do we get in front of more people? How do we help more Canadians know about Willful and understand why it's important? And so I knew that if we could make it onto the show, it would be a huge platform for us. And, you know, the $1 million question is always, well, did you actually want the money? Did you actually need the money? And so it was great because it actually did time with us going out and raising some money anyways. So yeah, we had moved out to Prince Edward County from Toronto, so about 2 hours east of the city. And my husband and I, because we're co-founders, we had a lot of time together during COVID. And so we just decided to apply. It's a really easy application process, nothing to lose. We knew that we didn't do it year one. We waited until we knew we had the numbers. I've watched the show enough to know, okay, I have the numbers, it's defensible, I have a great growth plan. And we practiced our pitch so much. We probably could have recited it in our sleep, but not just the pitch. We practiced all of the questions we knew they would ask, probably 50 of them. We wrote out and practiced the answers to. We literally just walked around Prince Edward County, practicing the pitch and going through all these questions. So I've actually been way more nervous for other things in my career at Willful. Dragon's Den, I felt super confident because we really over-prepared, but the experience was wonderful. I mean, I think when you walk into a room of high net worth individuals like the Dragons, you worry they won't get the Willful vision because, you know, we cater to a lot of folks that have simple situations, but if you're a Dragon, you might have some complexities or tax planning needs that might require going to a professional. And so, you know, you always worry that they'll say, well, you know, this wouldn't work for me, so I'm not going to invest. But by and large, they all really resonated with this idea of no one talks about it. It's really important. This is a great tool. And luckily, Michelle believed in it so much that we struck a deal, and she is now an investor and part of the Willful ecosystem. So yeah, it was a great experience, very similar to what you see on TV, and very glad we did it. And actually this season, we have a partnership with a company called Notary Pro, which does online notarization of all documents, but wills and other documents as well. And they just went on and pitched and got a deal as well. And so it's great to see more kind of legal tech companies that are getting some airtime because, you know, we're not always seen as the sexiest of, you know, fintech and AI. They're all the sexy ones, and legal tech is kind of this like over in the corner. But there's a lot of innovation happening in this space, and they're good businesses.
So I'm curious then, with these early investors who clearly knew that they were going to have to be in, they were going to have to bet on you, they were going to have to be in it for the long haul. With all of these investors, how do you balance their expectation for what's going to happen with your plan for, like, I'm sure you've got a very well laid out, one step after the other plan. How do you balance those two?
Quite honestly, our investors are super supportive. Even though many of them have been investors since day one for, you know, over 7 years, they're along for the ride and they're excited and they trust kind of the vision that we have for the company. And I think also I've erred on the side of being overly transparent. When we were in Founder Fuel, we had an amazing session on investor updates and crafting really compelling investor updates. And so we send a really in-depth quarterly update that goes well beyond the numbers and talks about, you know, the challenges, all of the great things that are happening, the product and where it's heading, partnerships, pretty much anything that you could want to know about the company. So I think there's a sense that we overshare and try to err on the side of being transparent to a fault. And so we don't actually get a lot of questions from our investors because we keep them pretty informed. And the growth plan is, we are often so paralyzed by opportunity at Willful, because if you look at the estate planning journey, and then when someone passes away, the whole journey of applying for probate, estate settlement, not much of it has been digitized. Not much of it has been improved. It is very paper-based. It is very antiquated. And so it's almost, our biggest challenge is focus. Our biggest challenge isn't, how can, where can we grow? It's how can we focus in with the limited resources that we have, and where should we place our bets?
It almost feels like you're constrained by this, all of these archaic systems. You're trying to advance things by becoming more tech forward, yet you're trying to mesh with these still paper-based systems, fill this form out and take it down to this office. Do you have any expectation that those processes will catch up anytime soon?
I do, because they're very expensive for the government. So there was an article I read the other day about how the number one barrier to completely digitizing the probate process, probate is basically getting legal authority for that the will is valid and that the executor can act on your behalf. And this is a very paper-based process with the courts. And the article said the number one barrier to bringing this online is legislation, the fact that a will still has to be on paper, and so you can't digitize probate. And they cited the massive cost to the government of probate applications and how much the government could save if they just brought this process online. So again, at a certain point, either taxpayers will put their hands up and say that's ridiculous and unacceptable, or the government themselves will put their hands up and say, wow, we could really be streamlining this. And we already actually see that through some programs. So the Indigenous Bureau of the government actually funds local Indigenous communities and programs that help Indigenous people get free wills, because it's such a cost to the government if someone passes away without a will. So I think, money talks. And if we can prove that having a will is important, not just because it streamlines that individual's finances and estate settlement, but because it saves the courts, the government, the banks, all of these people tons of money, that's when I think we'll see a lot of innovation happen.
I mean, I'm convinced, but I'm not the government. So
okay, please call Doug Downey, Ontario's Attorney General, and convince him to table a bill.
Well, this is exactly what I was going to ask, Erin. Do you officially have like a lobby budget? Like, are you actively lobbying governments to make these changes and to digitize and catch up?
We have in the past, especially during COVID. It was a time when it was very top of mind, right? During COVID, no one had a printer at home. No one could get together with two witnesses in person to execute documents like powers of attorney, and people were dying. And so these documents mattered, and people were we saw our website traffic go up 600% in the first 2 weeks when COVID broke out. So it was very top of mind, and there was a lot of attention on it. And so that's when we were kind of putting attention into lobbying. But again, small company, limited resources, both people and money. We really have to decide where to place our bets. And I'm also not an expert on government lobbying. So if anyone listening is, I'd love your tips, but we've made the bet that that's not the best place that we can focus. The best place we can focus is on just making sure we have the best product possible, getting in front of Canadians, teaching them about why this is important. And hopefully when the law changes, we can then help them to update their wills, to a digital version. But for now, we're just, playing nice in the sandbox and making it work with the paper documents.
So all that to say, obviously things move very slowly, but what do you see for the future of estate planning? Do you see it at some point going entirely digital?
I have a lot of predictions, either that Willful will do or others will do. I do believe that all of these processes will be completely digital, from creating a will and power of attorney documents to notarizing copies of things, to probate and estate settlement processes, whether with the courts or with financial institutions. I do think that you're going to start to see AI play in a huge way, right? AI could probably generate a will for you today on ChatGPT, not saying it's the best version of one, but we can already do that. And more importantly, AI can be a tool to educate and synthesize. We have an AI-powered chatbot through Ada, the customer support company, the Canadian company. And it right now is answering 60% of our customers' questions without them having to escalate to a human, which is huge. And so lots of opportunity for education. Explain this clause in the will to me like I'm 5. All of us could benefit from using less legalese and having more, plain language explanation. And I also see a massive opportunity for identity verification and biometrics, right? Mm-hmm. Right now, the witnesses of a will are meant to say, yes, Erin is the person who created the will. Well, we have such great digital identity verification software now. Why do we need that? Why not just use some sort of verification service that does facial recognition and analyzes my government ID and says, yes, this is Erin, and it's immutable that this is her. I'm not just relying on these two people's word over here. Same with biometrics. Why do I even need to sign a will with my signature? Why can't I use a thumbprint? Why can't I use, some other form of like facial recognition or eye scanning? So obviously some of these sound a little bit futuristic, but I'd say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the stuff we're doing today with AI probably seems really futuristic. So again, I'm optimistic about how this industry will change. What I won't do is put a timeline on it because, again, very slow moving. And I will say, in the defense of legislators and regulators, their job is to protect the public. And so I understand that they're looking at new technology and saying, what are the benefits? What are the potential gains? But also, what are the risks, right? Security and some of these other concerns that I've heard them voice. I still think it's the right direction to go, but I understand that they have to move slowly.
Understandable. So we like to end the podcast with the same question. And this one may require some thought, but if you could go back in time before some of your bigger challenges in developing Willful and give yourself a piece of advice that might have helped smooth out some of those barriers, what would you have told yourself from the very beginning?
Oh my goodness, this is such a great question. There's so many things that I wish I could go back and tell myself. I think, when I was running my agency, I often saw, like, I'm a quite empathetic person. I really care about the team, how it feels to work at Willful. And I remember thinking that my empathy and leadership style was a negative and something that I needed to become more like Travis Kalanick at Uber. I needed to be meaner. I needed to, motivate with fear and I remember actually I had a business coach who tried to give me meanness training on how to be, less myself. And then I think I just had this realization at Willful. Another mentor of mine said, there's proven research that says if you lean into your strengths and try to focus on improving those, you're going to get a way better return than focusing on the things that you're bad at. And what if instead of being a negative, your empathy is actually a superpower? And the reason that people want to use Willful and the reason people want to work there is because you actually care about them, about the mission. And do you really believe that those companies who motivate with yelling and screaming and storming out of meetings are actually getting anything done, or that people are motivated and inspired to work for them? So my advice, if I went back, even pre-Willful, would be lean into your strengths, own it. It's not a bad thing to care about people, to care about making a positive impact in the world, in addition to having a great business. And maybe that's your superpower.
I've only known you for about 30 minutes, but you really don't seem like the kind of person who would be comfortable in that role as an angry, yelling, motivated by fear kind of person.
No, I don't think it would work for me even if I tried. I think my team would just laugh and be like, "Oh, Erin," and move on. But luckily, we don't have anyone on the team like that either. So yeah, I don't think it would be tolerated.
Well, it was a pleasure learning all about Willful. Can't wait to see where things, as you say, slowly, but see where things go for Willful. Thank you so much, Erin. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate it.
Idea to Investment is sponsored by TD Ferrera Wealth Advisory Group and is made possible by Tech Alliance of Southwestern Ontario. If you'd like to learn more about Tech Alliance and the resources available to entrepreneurs and startups, go to techalliance.ca. My name is Ken Eastwood. Thank you so much for joining me.